This is D.S. Yoxheimer, and I never talked about Star Trek before on my show, so I thought I watched the old ones growing up, the one with the original crew, and I do have sort of a fondness for them. Of course, Wrath of Khan is the best of all of them. Most would agree, but they did 6 of them. When you think about it, and I mean, now that I've watched them on Amazon, I realized, wow, they because I knew there were a lot of these films that the old crew did from the original series, but other than I don't count Star Trek Generations. Only had William Shatner doing sort of passing. Well, actually, yeah, James Doohan was in it and Chekhov. They were on the Enterprise B with who was captained by Alan Ruck, who played Cameron Fry in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So yeah, the Star Trek Generations did have some of the original crew, but the first movie, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, came out in 1979, and it's trippy. It had a lot of. It was right after Star Wars came out. So obviously, to capitalize on the success of Star Wars, Star Trek was revived in motion picture film. So and it didn't have they didn't have those sort of those maroon or red naval Scientology uniforms that they started wearing in the second movie, Wrath of Khan. It was sort of more 70s kind of leisure uniforms. It was kind of a transition between the ones from the 1960s series to the ones they wound up wearing in the rest of the films that the original crew that were in. And the first movie, I like the first movie. It's trippy and it's all weird, but it's not like Wrath of Khan where there's like a battle and stuff like that. It's more like Star Wars in a way. It's an old enemy, Khan, from the TV series, who Kirk left abandoned on a planet with his people, and Khan is a genetically engineered genetically engineered person from the late 21st century, like kind of this century. Yeah, kind of like this century, and he basically wreaked all kinds of havoc on the Enterprise in the 1960 series. So, and he was an awesome villain, and it was the Star Trek franchise at its best. The first movie, motion picture, it's about finding out what is it? The probe Voyager. Basically, they think that's interpreted as V'ger before they find it, but it was expanding its knowledge, and it grew and everything like that, and it destroyed some Klingon warbirds in the first part of the movie. So Kirk took over the Enterprise again, even though it was supposed to be this actor named Stephen Collins, who I forget what was it. I don't know his character's name, but I remember that he was busted for molesting some young girls. He played the dad on Seventh Heaven. And interestingly enough, another Star Trek connection, the mother who played his wife on Seventh Heaven played the marine biologist in Star Trek: The Voyage Home, where they have to, get this, find some humpback whales because a probe is basically wreaking havoc on Earth because it's trying to communicate with humpback whales, but they're extinct because they were hunted into extinction on Earth years ago. Of course, that's the plot of it, but yeah, it is kind of funny that they are in the same franchise, in the same canon, but we don't. So anyway, and so Star Trek: The Motion Picture, they find that it's Voyager. I'm not going into these in too much detail. I'm just going over, giving a little bit of a synopsis of all 6 of these films. And Wrath of Khan, of course, he plays an awesome villain. There's this, it's basically a I don't know what I would call it, a device, a way to re-terraform a planet called Genesis, and it could be sort of weaponized. It's just this giant device, thing. And Kirk's girlfriend, or an ex of his that he has a son with, I think his name's Scott. I don't know. I can't remember his fucking name. But anyway, long story short, they create this crazy thing that can terraform a planet within a couple of days, or whatever, pretty much almost immediately. And Khan and his people they lure, or somehow the Reliant, it's another ship that Chekhov happens to be on, comes across the planet where the Botany Bay, which was the ship that Khan and his people came from. And so anyway, they go to this planet. Long story short, Khan puts this weird little larvae thing that takes over your mind into his ear, with these these tweezers or forceps or whatever you fucking call them. Fucking gross as shit. And takes over him and this other Starfleet commander's minds, and they wind up having to interact with they wind up on the Genesis planet, and they beam down there, and they manage to the one guy fucking kills himself, and of course Chekhov, the little larvae thing, crawls out of his ear and stuff, and he doesn't succumb to it. He doesn't wind up killing Kirk and the crew. And it's I'm not sure he gets basically Khan gets his hands on the Genesis weapon, and there's that scene in the movie where I think I can use the communicator here to illustrate here. See, it even makes noises Khan, yells at him and shit, because he takes it, and he's generally pissed off at him. But that's Kirk's big dramatic Shakespearean moment in the whole Star Trek franchise. So they have a battle royale. I mean, Khan fucks up the Enterprise big time, does a lot of damage to it, and then they trick Khan by getting the prefix code, which is basically to unlock all the systems on the Reliant, and lowers the Reliant's shields, and they shoot and they blast that ship all to hell, and both ships get really fucked up really bad, and I'm really talking about this like a Trekkie, aren't I? And so anyway, they go into it's like a nebulous cosmic cloud or whatever, I forget what it was called, and basically it just makes communications and visuals and all that, in shields pretty much useless, so they were just doing it to hide. So Khan went in there and tricked Kirk, Captain Kirk basically, or Admiral Kirk, I'm sorry, he's called Admiral Kirk at this point, tricks him, fucks him off, just blows one of the warp nacelles off and just fucks that ship up all to hell. And then Khan uses the Genesis weapon, which he already stole. He activates that, and in the meantime, warp power is already been the warp core was damaged on the Enterprise, so they couldn't go to warp to get away when Khan activates the Genesis device, and so he's just basically gonna, he's on this basically suicide, sort of terroristic, I'm gonna blow everybody up thing, and of course we all know last minute, Spock just goes down to the engineering and goes into the warp core chamber and puts on oven mitts, and then takes this giant thing off and just pokes around in there, and all of a sudden the warp engines are back online, and Kurt's like, "Go, Scotty, go!" And he just takes off, or something like that, And then they find out, Spock was all fucked up, He's a Vulcan, he could sort of sustain the radiation enough to fix it, but he couldn't survive it ultimately. So they send Spock off on they have a little space funeral, and they shoot him out of a sort of like almost like a torpedo, photon torpedo casing, but I think it's like a big coffin that looks like my glasses case. And Kirk says those famous words. He goes, of all the whatever aliens I've ever met, he was the most human, you know. And that's the end of that. And then the third movie, they look for Spock, and they shoot Spock's coffin, or torpedo, or whatever you want to call it, lands on the Genesis planet. So this basically, Spock is Jesus now. Spock basically comes back from the fucking dead because of the Genesis planet when Saavik, which is a Vulcan that was previously played by Kirstie Alley in Part 2 that I didn't mention, sorry, and David, who is the name of William Shatner's son. They go back to the Genesis planet and discover Spock as an infant, and he begins to grow up exponentially over the course of the film. Meanwhile, there's Commander Krug, who's played, he's my favorite Klingon character. It's played by fucking Christopher Lloyd, who played Doc Brown in the Back to the Future movies. So he comes, and they anyway, there's a big, basically, in this movie, this is the one where Captain Kirk tricks the Klingons into, this is full of spoilers. If you've never watched all the old Star Trek movies, just stop watching this. I'm just basically giving you the big points in all the films, essentially. So he tricks Commander Krug. They're going to take over the Enterprise because the Enterprise they stole the Enterprise to go back and look for Spock, because Spock's dad got to Kirk, and, of course Kirk, just says fuck you to the rules and takes off and steals the Enterprise. And then he gets there, and they get to the Genesis planet. Once they realize this is all going on, and I think Commander Krug wants the Genesis weapon, and after Kirk, basically they set the auto, just once he agrees to the Klingons that they can seize the Enterprise, all the crew of the Enterprise that are on there, Kirk and Scotty and McCoy and all of them, I think Chekhov are still there, or that was there, and Sulu were I don't know where Uhura was. She was there somewhere. I think she was, I forget where to place her. She was on the Genesis, or on some other, she went off with somebody else at this point in the movie, but it's hard to keep track. So they blow this, they basically set the auto-destruct, beam off, the Klingons beam on, and it just seemed like a real, why wouldn't the Klingon commander assume that the Enterprise had an auto self-destruct, and they wouldn't set it before they allow the ship to be taken, because they wouldn't allow a Federation ship to be seized by the Klingon Empire. But anyway, that was my thinking on it. But it's just it's a way to move the plot along, and a way for Commander Krug to have even more animosity towards Kirk, because they have basically while the planet is destructing, which is part of the flaw of the Genesis device, is that I guess the effects don't last on a planet. The planet just it goes through the whole process much faster of self-destructing, much in the way that Spock grew up fast, but they got him off the planet so he didn't die. So anyway, David gets stabbed. This is before they blew up the Enterprise, by the way. David gets stabbed, his son, Kirk's son, and that's why he agreed to allow the Klingons to seize the ship, so they wouldn't kill anybody else. So Kirk, that's also why Kirk used the opportunity to get revenge, or to basically take out all his men, because it was a strategic. It wasn't just revenge. It was a strategic measure, and so anyway, they when the planet's falling apart and everything like that, Commander Krug and Kirk fight it the fuck out. Doc Brown and I mean basically two of the biggest actors in sci-fi, film and all of that in fantasy, just fighting it out. And of course Kirk wins. He said he'd save his life, but he said he'd rather die than be, I guess, rescued by him. And Kirk beams off just before things really start to fall apart, and they get away in the Klingon warbird, or bird of prey. And that leads us basically, and I'm just trying to move right along here, that leads us to the voyage home. And interestingly enough, some of the DVDs of it will show you the Enterprise on the voyage home, even though you see it at the end. But the voyage home is basically, what I did mention this before, they're going to get whales! A probe has this movie, it's just like a wacky madcap comedy. They go to Earth back in the late 80s, around 1986, and this is what happened. It was the same year the Challenger tragedy happened, because the movie was dedicated to it. So they travel back in time. They came up with this madcap plan because Earth was being taken over or decimated by this probe that wanted to talk to whales, which really doesn't make any fucking sense. You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't they want to come back and see if dinosaurs are still here, or the dodo bird, or whatever, But just humpback whales. This probe, one species over all of them. I'm not talking about all the ones, all the other ones decimated, just one. You just have to go back in time and get one species. So the Earth is fucked up, and ships are being rendered, powerless and all of that. So they take the Klingon warbird and they go back in time. And Kirk's in a bunch of trouble. There was a tribunal in the beginning of it for what Kirk did for violating Starfleet regulations, and of course the Klingons wanted his head because he, killed a bunch of Klingons on his ship when he blew it up. But anyway, so they go back in time, and this is where they meet the mom on the mother on Seventh Heaven, who also played the wife of the one guy who played this captain from the first movie, who basically wanted to be command the Enterprise, but he couldn't because Kirk came back to do it for that particular mission, and he was kind of pissed off about it. But anyway, and he also played the mother in the first Child's Play movie. It's Catherine Hicks, and she's a good actress, and she's good in this movie. It's pretty silly. They're not very, like in other Star Trek like TV series and movies, they usually wear period clothing when they go down onto the planet, and they probably didn't have the resources to do that, but they're wearing their Starfleet uniforms, and just, Spock's acting all weird, and I know that's part of the humor of it and everything like that. But they go to see, they're basically the marina, not marina, whatever they call it, wherever they call the SeaWorld in San Francisco, and they get this, they find the two whales, George and Gracie, that are their names, these humpback whales, that they have to get them back. And then maybe they could have just said, hey, look, we're from the future, here's our ship, don't kill the whales, or things are going to get fucked up in a couple hundred years. But no one would buy that, so they had to transport them back. So, and there was all kind of problems, with just the ship and everything, because it was, the dilithium crystals were drained and all this, but they managed to fix all these problems by somehow they stole nuclear power with some device on a aircraft carrier. So that was called the Enterprise. And then, so yeah, this movie's so ridiculous. It's funny though too. It is funny because it takes the characters out of their normal element, but and everything. But they get all this together somehow. They get they make a tank by giving some plexiglass manufacturer a formula from the future for transparent aluminum. That's what Scotty did, so he fucking changed future. They changed a lot of future, which I found, one thing that was weirdly interesting is Chekhov was on board the aircraft carrier, and his phaser didn't work because of the radiation, because it's a nuclear powered ship, and it wouldn't work. So he throws the phaser, and the guy catches it. It's like a CIA agent. So he basically left behind future technology for, you know, in the hands of the government, which was fucked up and stupid. But anyway, I mean, anyone can do anything with that. You know what I mean? That thing's just... So, that was just my big thing. You know, you at least take it with you. I mean, it's like, oops. So, I mean, he did that as a distraction. So yeah, they get the whales magically. They transport them because they got released from the marina, or the whatever they call those places, not SeaWorld, but, you know, the aquarium, the big, yeah, that's what they call it. Don't they call these big public aquariums? Sorry, I just couldn't find the damn words. So, anyway, they get these two fucking big-ass whales on a Klingon warbird, because there's enough space in there, obviously. I mean, yeah, there would be. And... you know, just they don't, you know, it doesn't matter, they're just going to time travel back, and we're going to go back to the present day. So they get the whales, and they drop them off in the ocean and stuff like that. Well, they kind of crash and stuff because of the probe, and the whales speak back to the probe, and the probe, just this ball comes back, and it goes back inside the probe, like, go, everything's just fixed like that, just because they got the fucking whales. So anyway, Kirk gets demoted. In the meantime, they built another Enterprise that's identical to it, except it's called the Enterprise A, and they go and fly off in it. And I guess, you know, Catherine Hicks's character, she gets to stay because she's a marine biologist, and she is the one who probably would know the most about whales. So because she kind of jumped in Kirk's arms or whatever when they were teleporting him back into the Klingon ship, which really she was only teleporting one person though. They should have gotten melded together. Another technical issue. But anyway, on to the next fucking movie. The Final Frontier, which was not the final movie. There's one more after this. It's the Undiscovered Country. The Final Frontier is Spock's didn't know he had a brother, and he's sort of a douchebag. And he hijacks the Enterprise so he can go and find God, to bury, or whatever that is. So, and so basically, in the beginning of this movie, they're on a camping trip. The three, you know, basically the original crew, I think, except Scotty's not there, and he's up fixing the Enterprise and stuff and getting it all, even though it's a new ship basically. And anyway, so they're camping and all this crap, and their camping trip gets interrupted, and they have to go and check out what's going on in the neutral zone. There's some shady shit as usual, and so that just goes, you know, badly. They Kirk loses the ship somehow. They get they hijack a shuttlecraft, and then Spock won't shoot this Vulcan because, well, it's his half brother. He didn't know that Kirk didn't know he had a half brother. So anyway, long story short on this one, it's probably one of the worst Star Trek movies ever. They go and go to this place to, and some bad special effects too. They go to this Beyond the Great Barrier and find God. And there's some people who are with Spock's brother. I forget his name, honestly, because I don't even give a shit. I shouldn't say that I don't give a shit, but it's I'm just IMDbing it real quick here because I don't even think the cast like doing this movie. Sybok. That's I knew it was Sybok. Lawrence Luckinbill. I do remember him because he played Elizabeth Shue's father in Cocktail. So Sybok is the one that was leading this whole cult or whatever. He was the L. Ron Hubbard of these people that were looking for God, and he gets them there, and they God's wreaking this whatever it is. It's just some kind of, they don't know who it is. It's like this big head. It looks like a cheap hologram inside of this sort of Stonehenge like sort of arch structure, and he hits some people with lasers, and he needs the ship, he needs the Enterprise, and I think Kirk asks, why does God need a ship? And of course it goes to hell from there, and basically, and the God just fucks with Sybok's head, and Sybok runs into where this energy is that where God is supposed to be, this God, like it's just some sort of strange entity. They don't know what it is, basically. But it's not God. And the Klingon warbird shows up, or a bird of prey shows up and just freaking shoots it and blows it up or something, or shoots when it starts coming after Kirk and beams him aboard and stuff like that. And it's one of those movies where the Klingons are trying to make nice with the Federation a little bit more and stuff like that. And that's that movie in a nutshell. I'm not going to talk too much more about it. I'm going to go to the final one, which is Star Trek The Undiscovered Country. This is 1991. So these movies went from 1979 to 1991. And technically all the movies, the Next Generation movies, are sequels, but I'm not going to go into those. I'm just talking about the original crew. But this was the final movie with them all together, and they stated that this would be the final movie with them all together. And at least it was better than The Final Frontier. I think that was supposed to be it, but it sucked such a big one that they decided to forego that. So The Final Frontier took place in basically after, just about when they were about to retire. And Kirk just basically is like, his attitude is, we've done our bit for king and country, we're done with all this, we're not doing this sort of diplomatic mission to meet with Klingons. And which one I'm looking for? I'm just trying to get a little bit in terms of who these characters are, because I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. So Kirk's supposed to meet with the Klingons, and it goes fucking haywire. Somebody goes in there with after they have dinner with him on the Enterprise, or I think it's on the Enterprise. They go. The Klingons, when they go back to their ship, they're attacked. Some people with, they disable their gravity and all that, and they just basically go in there and shoot the place up, and or they're wearing like space suits with magnet boots, everything like that, and all of that. Kim Cattrall plays a really gorgeous looking Vulcan. Forgot about that one. Hard to forget about that one. that's one of the definitely high points. It's not. It's hardly the worst of these movies. Worf from Star Trek: The Next Generation plays one of his ancestors. There's a quote in it by the one Klingon High Commander's daughter: "War is obsolete as we are in danger of becoming." Yeah, basically there was a mine explosion on one of their moons or something, and the Klingons had 50 years basically of their home world, to live. It wouldn't be inhabitable anymore, and the crew is looking I'm just kind of looking at some of this stuff. They're just playing a little bit of the actual trailer here. No, it's hard to play it because I have this in. Ads. So yeah, there's ads. That pisses me off. I hate when they do that shit. Anyway, just get that off of there. Technical difficulty. I was gonna play that trailer, but fuck it. So, not missing too much. So anyway, yeah, they basically the Klingon homeworld is the Klingon. They wanted to negotiate terms as to where the Klingons can live, and they were talking about the Federation outposts and all this stuff, and there's a big disagreement over this, so an act of terrorism takes place, and actually one of the terrorists, and again this is all spoilers and shit, but these movies have been out for years, so if you haven't seen them by now, you don't give a shit. But if you haven't and you're interested, don't watch the rest of this. But Kim Cattrall's, I don't know her Vulcan name. She's in on it. She seems pretty much like she's all about regulations and everything, and she's on the up and up. But they were not. Basically, the movie is about. Making peace with, it's like us making peace with what would be a country that, well, basically in cahoots with Trump. I don't know, but making, almost in a sense, making on the road to making the Klingons part of the Federation, I think, and that's what this movie was supposed to be about, and trying to make it is a better story than The Final Frontier. Definitely, it was. I think anything's better than that. So that was, I think, the goal of the film, to make one more with the original crew. But they were up there. They were old when they were doing this. They just did not. They were beyond retirement age. So. But I don't know, all you have to do is kind of sit in a chair like this and take us out, Sulu, or something like that. I don't know if I like what Picard does. He's sort of the, engage. Number one. Have Geordi analyze that tachyon first and what effect it had on the warp nacelles, that type of shit. That's kind of how he talks, and William Shatner's the sort of, he's the, Scotty, give me all you got. He doesn't care. He goes, it's going to take 8 hours, sir. Scotty, I need it in 5 minutes. And he just does that whole thing. All right, that's enough of that. So, yeah, in the movie, Sulu is the captain of his own ship. He's captain of the Excelsior, which was the ship featured in, it was in the third movie when they came back, in the beginning of the third movie after Wrath of Khan, the new ship that had transwarp drive, as Sulu put it. It's supposed to have transwarp drive. And getting back to, I'm not even avoiding even talking about this country. It's rated 6th of the 13. Oh, it's 6th of the 13 Star Trek films. Not 6th as far as good. It's just the number 6th movie. I was just getting confused there for a moment. But yeah, basically that's what happens with it. And they head back to where they basically, in the end of the movie, they stop an assassination attempt, and at these peace talks. And I don't know, I think Kronos was the moon, the mighty moon that blew up. I don't know if the peace talks or the peace accord was on Earth in San Francisco. I'm pretty sure it was, because that's where our Starfleet headquarters is. And I am not like an uber Trekkie. I mean, I like Star Trek a lot, I do. I don't know Star Trek like the hardcore convention-going fans do, but I definitely have enough of an affection for these movies to do a video about it and talk a little bit about the first 6 films that I grew up with. So, with that said, and with this very kind of sloppy dissertation of all the Star Trek movies, after drinking some coffee there, because I work so hard, I really do. I am going to beam out of here. One to beam up.